like to ask Dr. Brenda Carr to unmute and turn on her video to begin her presentation that will provide us with an overview of vitiligo. Dr. Carr?
Good morning. I'm Brenda Carr. I'm a medical officer in the Division of Dermatology and Dentistry, and I'll be providing an overview of vitiligo. Next slide, please. Here's an outline of my talk. I'll begin with the introduction, a few words on epidemiology, then clinical features, treatment, and the impact of vitiligo. Next slide, please. Vitiligo is a chronic acquired disorder of pigment loss. Characteristic lesions are white patches with sharp margins. Vitiligo results from destruction of melanocytes, and there are a number of the pathogenesis is not entirely understood. There are a number of proposed theories as to the cause of the melanocyte destruction. The prevailing theory appears to be autoimmunity. Next slide, please. The prevalence of vitiligo is estimated to be at 1% of the worldwide population. Nearly 50% of patients have onset before the age of 20 years, and onset in children younger than 12 years of age is common. Vitiligo affects males and females equally. Next slide, please. There are two major types of vitiligo. The non-segmental type is the most common form and presents bilaterally, symmetrically, generally, and is unpredictable in its course, which may be characterized by progression and periods of flares. There are several subtypes of non-segmental vitiligo, including localized, acrofacial, generalized, and universal. Segmental vitiligo generally presents unilaterally and is stable in its course. Initially, it may progress rapidly, but ultimately stabilizes. Hair in affected areas may be depigmented, and vitiligo may involve the mucosa. Next slide, please. This picture depicts a patient with acrofacial vitiligo, which generally involves the head, hands, and feet. This particular variant is sometimes referred to as lip tip vitiligo because it involves the lips and the tips of the digits. Next slide, please. This patient has generalized vitiligo, and you can see the widespread dissemination of disease on both sides of the trunk and the upper extremities. Next slide, please. This is another patient with generalized vitiligo, and this patient has prominent involvement of the face, as well as the trunk and extremities. Next slide, please. This is a patient with universal vitiligo, and you can see the trunk is nearly completely depigmented with small islands of pigmented skin present. Next slide, please. And finally, we have a patient with segmental vitiligo, which is involving one side of the face, and you can see that some of the hairs in the affected areas are depigmented. Next slide, please. There are no FDA-approved products with vitiligo repigmentation as an indication. The only FDA-approved therapy with the vitiligo indication is monobenzone cream, which is no longer marketed, and it's indicated for final depigmentation in extensive vitiligo, so for removal of remaining pigment in widespread disease. Next slide, please. Topical therapies include corticosteroids as first-line treatment and used in several strengths and in different regimens. Calcineurin inhibitors may be the choice for areas that are vulnerable to atrophy, such as steroid atrophy, such as the face, and they may be used along with corticosteroids on alternate days with the steroids. Vitamin D analogs are less often used because the efficacy may be limited. Next slide, please. Phototherapy is administered using either light in the ultraviolet B wavelength or the ultraviolet A wavelengths. There are two categories of UVB therapy. Narrowband UVB treatment is the light phototherapy treatment of choice because of its efficacy and its good safety profile. Targeted UVB therapy may be administered using monochromatic excimer light via lasers or lamps. Sorelin with UVA light photochemotherapy, or PUVA, was the first form of phototherapy, and the Sorelin may be applied topically to individual lesions or orally if the disease is more widely disseminated. Current practices favor the use of narrowband UVB because of the safety profile of PUVA, which includes phototoxicity, GI distress, and increased risk of skin cancer. Next slide, please. Systemically, corticosteroids may be used to stabilize rapidly progressive disease, and they're most commonly used via the oral route, but may be administered via other routes. There's limited information on the use of other immunosuppressants, such as methotrexate, cyclosporin, and cyclophosphamide. Next slide, please. Broadly, surgical therapies involve the transplantation of melanocytes from pigmented regions to vitelliginous lesions, with the hope being that the melanocytes will proliferate and populate the vitelliginous areas. The tissue grafts are accomplished by several methods. The punch technique involves obtaining the graft by punch biopsy techniques. In the suction blister method, the graft is obtained from a blister that's been created in the donor region. Cellular grafts may be used for wider spread lesions. These techniques are more complicated and expensive and involve the use of suspensions that contain keratinocytes and melanocytes. Next slide, please. Camouflage techniques include the use of cover-up makeup, which is applied daily, tattooing, which carries the risk of infection, mismatch or poor matching of the tattoo pigment with the native skin color, and the vitelliginous lesions may progress beyond the borders of the tattoos. Self-tanning products are waterproof creams that may provide coverage for several days. Next slide, please. A possible adjunctive role for vitamins, minerals, and botanicals has been explored. Next slide, please. Vitiligo may significantly impact patients' psychosocial wellness. Some patients have reported feelings of disempowerment and loss of self-esteem, a profound diminution in the quality of life. Others have reported feelings of worry, anger, shame, and depression with impairment of social life. It's important to note that these sentiments don't characterize all patients with vitiligo, as some patients are very accepting of the condition. Economic impact may include costs associated with medical office visits and cost of supplies such as makeup. Next slide, please. So we're aware of unmet medical needs experienced by patients who have vitiligo. We're conducting this public meeting to hear comments about the impact of vitiligo on patients, caregivers, and family members. I want to thank you for taking the time to join us to share your experiences and your unique perspectives. Thank you.